live. It is 7:33, so I'm a little bit late. Lots of stuff going on. Hopefully you guys are doing well. The photo that I have up, the thumbnail, if you check it out, it is a 4.3 liter V6. Actually, this is an early one, so a non-balance shaft version. Non-balance shaft. The one that I ran with the supercharger on it was actually a later balance shaft motor. I kind of like that. I don't know, the balance shaft the motor did seem to run smoother and idle and all of that stuff. So, and I'm not really that concerned about the balance shaft taking power away, although I do want to do a test. That's one of the things I have on the list for the Dodge, not the 2.2, because the early 2.2 that I have doesn't have a balance shaft, but the later 2.5 certainly does. And so one of the things that people do is get rid of the balance shaft. So it'd be interesting to see what happens when we get rid of that, whether or not we think, and maybe we can vote, whether or not we think that any sort of gain in power that you might have from not driving the balance shaft, is that, is it worthwhile? Does it justify not having the balance shaft there? The balance shaft, primarily, they're not for balance basically at every RPM. They're actually designed to take away imbalance or vibration or NVH or something at specific RPMs, the way I understand it. So it's not that it throws the thing out of balance. And lots of people take them off. They did them on the old Starion turbos, on any of the bigger stuff, primarily bigger 4-cylinder stuff. But on this V6, they also had it, and it works. But I did like the later one, and we did some stuff with a supercharger. This one was a turbo from Jason over at JTFAB. He welded up this exhaust, and the thing that I like about it, if you take a look at the photo, you will see, but the thing that I like about it is that this particular exhaust allowed us to run this motor NA. We could have just run it with the open headers, although they were forward facing, so they were facing us toward the console room with the window screen. So they were forward facing relative to the motor, but they merge into a Y, kind of typical of a single turbo application. And then we could then take a section of exhaust with a turbo flange on it, mount it on there, and just run the exhaust out. So the headers would merge into kind of a single exhaust. You can see that the wastegate's already also there, but it doesn't come into play on an NA motor because there's no boost. And so this all worked out. And then what we could do once we ran the motor NA, we could just take that exhaust off, our NA exhaust, put the turbo on there, route the exhaust, run the discharge tube going. It was going through a blow-through carburetor on this particular application. We did have some issues with this motor, if I remember right. So we didn't really get to crank this thing up. The turbo that we had for it was one that Jason had, and we may have tried a 76 millimeter on there from CX Racing that I don't think worked as well as the one that he had. The spool rate wasn't as good, and the other turbo seemed like it was a better match for the power output of this combination. I think that this thing was only making somewhere near 400 or so. I don't think we ran a ton of power on it. But they certainly have the potential to do that, because we know that you can make, with these 4.3s, with ported heads and enough camshaft in them, a decent intake manifold and stuff, we know that you can certainly make 300 horsepower with them without too much trouble. And once you do that, then obviously you have a multiplier effect, and you can get there, you can get to some fairly high numbers with some reasonable amounts of boost. Lots of guys doing them on the SYCLONEs and the TYPHOONs, the factory GM stuff. Guys have made a bajillion horsepower with those things and drag raced them. Although I'd be interested to see, and somebody may answer this, somebody out there in comment land may know. I wonder what the fastest SYCLONE or TYPHOON is versus what the fastest Grand National is. I would tend to think that the fastest Grand National probably would be leading that, but I don't know. I don't know how much development they guys actually. My guess is they'd put a lot more development into the making the Grand National stuff fast, and less in doing the 4.3 liter stuff. But I'd be interested to see. And what will happen invariably when you ask a question like that is like, oh, this guy made some, billet block, billet headed, double race twin S475s, and on a 50 shot or 500 shot or whatever it is, and ran boost and made 1 million horsepower. I'm more interested in what is the more average guys, what were they doing? Guys are certainly running, I'm sure, 9s and 8s and probably 7s with these things. I remember Duttweiler and those guys doing that way back. Even Jim Bell did a bunch of stuff with the Grand Nationals way back. But the Cyclones, I remember driving a Cyclone and a Typhoon, and both of them very, very cool. All-wheel drive stuff hooks up really nice. And for the current level of performance stuff back in the day, they were fairly impressive. I mean, now obviously we have stuff like Hellcats and ZR1s and things, and so it's a whole different world. But back then they were pretty sporty. But the cool thing is, if you take a look at the headers, they are definite long tube headers. They merge into a Y pipe. Not unlike the way that I did when I started testing Turbo LS stuff. Jason actually did this. We had the long tube headers. You could make them either down and forward or up and forward. I've run them in both configurations, but he made 3-inch V bands to mount to the 3-inch V bands on the headers. And then the Y pipe came together as a dual 3-inch into a single 3-inch. And then we would mount the turbo on that. And then we ran stuff like that a lot. The problem is that on the headers that I was running for the LS, they just weren't very good. I mean, they worked and they flowed, but they were plug burners and they didn't allow good plug access. They just weren't really designed very well for that application. For years and years, I wanted to just cut them off and do it correctly so that we could get to all the plug wires and not have to worry about burning them and stuff. And now it looks like Hooker or Holley have done that, because the set that they have at West Tech, one of the guys, they sent a set probably to the Engine Masters guys, and they've run a turbo deal on there. And I walked over and looked at it, and I'm like, I wonder if they did an upgraded job on these so that they wouldn't be like the other ones. And it looks like they have. The plug clearance is really, really good. So they've rebent the tubes, there's room to do that in the chassis that you'd be using this in. There's room to have it done right. And I salute them. So Holley and Hooker guys, I salute the engineers who made these and redesigned them to make it so that you have that access. Maybe they heard people like me complaining about it, and I'm sure others were doing that as well. On the V6, plug access was not a problem at all. These work really well. I think that this motor was originally designed to run in a sand rail, so there's a lot of room, for the headers and exhaust and externally, so you don't have to miss nearly as many things as on the sand rail as you do, actually in an engine compartment. And so this motor might still be sitting around somewhere. I'd have to ask Jason to see what configuration is. It'd be kind of cool. I like these little V6s, and I'd like to run more of them. I'd like to do more of that stuff. But the question is, and the reason that I brought this photo out is, and it's a question I haven't answered, and I get asked all the time, well, what about long tube headers? We do test. We've run on most of the turbo stuff on the LS particularly, but even on small block Chevys and big block Chevys and stuff, we run stock exhaust manifolds. We also run headers on them. I just have never done a direct back-to-back test running the two configurations, because whenever you change the header, you also have to change the Y pipe. The Y pipe is going to be different if you run headers compared to running stock exhaust manifolds. It just has to be. There's no way for it not to be. And then a comparison between some kind of stock exhaust manifold, like with the LS stuff, the factory truck manifolds, especially if you use all of them, and on the dyno, we don't have to kind of re-weld them to reposition them, which you do on a lot of chassis. But running the stock exhaust manifolds from a truck and running it into a Y pipe, that actually works very well. We know we've made lots and lots of power with that. But were we to take these headers, these Hooker headers, and run them, we'd have to build a completely new Y pipe. It would have to be a different length. It'd have to be a different diameter. I mean, I guess we could neck it down, but that's going to have to change. The position of the turbo could probably be the same. We would just have it wide together and have the turbo end up in the same spot. That wouldn't be insurmountable, so that the turbo position and the exhaust would all be the same, and then the discharge going from the turbo into the motor, into the throttle body, whether it's a truck manifold or fast or whatever would be running. So that would be the same. But there would be two things that you're changing. You're changing the Y pipe and you're changing the headers. And then the other question is, like on the LS, or if we did this on a small block Chevy or a big block Chevy, a Coyote, whatever we did it on, the other question is, where do we test this at? And by where, I mean, at what power level do we test this at? Does it do anything at 7 pounds? Does it do anything at 27 pounds or 40 pounds? I mean, where do you go up to? And I know people say, oh, you just run it all the way up. No, that's actually not a good test. The reason is because the motor is not repeatable when you do that. You can't run 40 pounds on something and have it, at least I haven't been able to, and have it do exactly the same thing every time. So then when you do that, first of all, obviously, unless it's a dedicated build, unless Steve Morris or Nelson or one of those guys built the motor, running it like that all the time is going to be hard on the motor, especially if it's a junkyard motor like I would put on there. And then the repeatability question just kind of throws it out. So you know, and I've had people show me that kind of stuff. They're like, oh yeah, look, this made power. I'm like, no, that actually didn't make power. You did it on a chassis dyno, and the boost is different, and the airfill is different, and you're just attributing something to this. You can't do that unless you could make 10 runs in a row and have it be the same every time. And by the same, I mean the same. Because if you're talking about 1,500 or 2,000 horsepower, and you have a variance of 20, 30, or 50 horsepower, I mean, how do you determine whether or not that's a real thing? You can monitor lots of stuff. We can monitor back pressure to see if that's the same. But quite honestly, all of the flow coming out the headers or the exhaust going into, especially if you go into a single turbo, isn't the turbo going to be the restriction there? It's kind of miraculous how turbos even work, given how small that flow orifice is relative to what we have on NA motors. We would never restrict an NA motor and have it blow down through a turbo like that. Nobody would do that. Nobody on an NA motor would do that. And yet, works just fine on a turbo. So here's what I can tell you. I've run this test one time that I can remember. But again, we had so many changes. I ran it on a Honda, and the header seemed to help. I don't have actual, like, what I would call concrete back-to-back data. I think that the motor made more power with the header, but you know, I got to do a real test. We didn't run it on this one, and I've only done anecdotal testing, and by that I mean no testing at all. But I can tell you, when we do run the headers on the LS, the motor sounds completely different. That could be metallurgy. It sounds much happier. It seems to make more power with the headers. But whenever we run the headers, everything else is right. I mean, we usually do that on the Big Bang motors, so we're running lots of boost on them. And it's hard to compare, you know, at the same boost level. Like, let's say we chose 1,000 horsepower, ran it at 1,000 horsepower, and ran it with the stock exhaust manifolds, and then ran it with turbo. That's something that could probably be done on, or 900 or whatever the number is. That's something that could probably be done fairly consistently and accurately, I think, just to see if there's any difference. But then that begs the question, well, do you need that? If we show something there, or let's say we don't show anything there, does that mean it doesn't show anything from 0 pounds of boost all the way up to whatever it took to make the 900? And would it show more after? I mean, you know, there's a lot of questions. But that doesn't stop me from wanting to do it, because there are so many different types of exhaust manifolds. We have this long tube header, like I'm showing, or headers in this case of a V engine, like I'm showing on the V6 or on a V8 LS or small block Chevy. And then, because there are so many different kinds of exhaust manifolds, like the LS truck manifolds are really good. I mean, they work great for turbo applications. Some of them don't flow nearly as well. Like, you look at a Ram's Horn Chevrolet small block, or one of the tucked in, you know, F body ones, or a flattened one. Like a real good example is a early Dodge Ram Hemi manifold. They're terrible. The SRT8 manifolds at least are good, and they certainly flow more. They certainly make more power NA. So you'd think that would translate into more power with a turbo, and then the header makes even more power than both of those. But does the scavenging, because the header is getting power not from flow, or making power not from flow so much as it is from scavenging, is it still getting that scavenging if we have a turbo on the other side of the, you know, on the end side of the header? The only thing I could tell you is that the motor sounds better with the turbos on it, and all forms of, like, professional racing, Formula One and IndyCar, and anybody that used turbo stuff, they all had headers on it. And, you know, a lot of that could be weight. It could be because they have to custom build it to fit for aero reasons and packaging and stuff like this. There's a lot of other things that could go into that, but I would tend to think that it probably does make more power. But how much, and is it worth it? And do you actually absolutely have to have it? All of that stuff is very, very important. So let's see what you guys are doing tonight. Let's see. We're going to start a poll. Okay, do long tube or just tube? They don't necessarily have to be really long. Or tube headers make more power than log manifolds, than log turbo manifolds. So we'll ask our community, see what they got going on. We got a lot of rain going on here, I'll tell you that. My telling me that she saw online or something that there was it's a cyclone for the rain that's coming down. It just. Let's see. Long tubes and rolls in the house. Procharge Mopar. Boss. Ben, Tim, everyone's in the house. Let's see. 440 checking in. What do you think of the 3.6 liter LS headed? I want to try one of those. I think it's kind of cool. More torque with long tubes, more torque with turbo. We're going to test that. Project Farm for gearheads. Gen 2 LT1 rules. They are good. Is the crank balance and a good balancer? Let's see. Recal. I'm glad it showed us D-Series guys some love. I'm in the process of a D16Y7 and a Y8 turbo build. Very cool. Sorry, guys. I got a Wahoo. Travis, much ado about nothing. Yeah, I think that motor was a mock-up thing, not unlike the mock-up intake manifold that I showed at one of the LS fests when I was there with guys from Brian Tooley Racing. It was a 3D printed one. We need some I know what I'm doing. Richard taught me t-shirts. Sean, you think the Cyclone is better than the Typhoon? What about the Cadillac LH2 Northstar engine? Is the Typhoon the same wheelbase as a Grand National? I think that they're shorter. So go to live chat. 87% are saying yes, long tubes make more power. Let's see. Let's see. Quick Google says GN at 7.1, Cyclone at 7.6. Surprising, I guess best 4.3 heads are better than the best 3.8 heads. But the 3.8 at least had more, I think probably more aftermarket support. Although the 4.3 had the actual Grand National Race Series stuff. So they had Brodex heads done for those. But they had stage 1 and stage 2 aluminum heads. And didn't they even have... Didn't people do aluminum blocks for the 3/8? Didn't they do race blocks for those? They may have been iron, but I remember that they used the didn't they use the Buick turbo motors in IndyCar also? Didn't they use stock block stuff there? Richard, would you ever run a test with a Flowmaster and a turbocharger? How much power loss? So do you just want the muffler after the turbo then? We can run that. We can run that on the Dodge, actually. Richard, should I follow BTR's advice to spend the money for titanium spring retainers that they recommended when I asked about the RPM warning on the hot rod camshaft? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. That doesn't sound right. I'll have to ask Brian Tooley about that. put a note down for myself. And I should have an answer tomorrow. Titanium retainers. And which kit is the hot rod cam? I don't know why the hot rod cam would require that. Maybe the low profile. Tie retainers. And the hot rod cat. We didn't have titanium retainers when we ran it. I can tell you that much. The SYCLONE with the 1UZ is pretty awesome. Dude merged the headers just like a flat plane crank. Very cool. TYPHOON is based off the S10 and the S10 Blazer. Todd's in the house. 79 K5 Blazer, 6-liter, 862 head, stage 1 truck. Springs, log manifold, the GT45, 76-pound injectors, Holly Terminator. Will it make 500 wheel horsepower at 5,000 feet? Yes. That turbo can do that. Tom, that's a lot of questions. Who is Julius? I haven't heard from Julius in a long time. I have not heard from Turbo Monza. I did send him an email, I think. And I haven't heard from David about the cylinder head. I live in Albuquerque. That was the elevation. No, I get that. But at 5,000 feet, I understand that. But it will do that at 5,000 feet. If that's a 6-liter 862 heads, the cam is the cam is a little small, and then you're going to have fairly high compression with a 862 head, but it's better that you're doing that on an LQ4 than an LQ9. But that manifold will support 700 or more, and so you'll be fine. I always wonder why none of the high-end parts didn't use oval or elliptical piping. Same volume and a smooth transition at no charge. Oval piping for what? We used oval tubing for the exhaust on our Bonneville car just for aero. But why would you want to use oval tubing coming out of a round exit from the turbo? Am I missing something? Power on the 2.2 is the test that you would do long tube headers versus whatever you're comparing it to. The actual thing that you're comparing it to, not as a representation. Like if you made really junky headers, they're not going to work very well. If you compare good headers to a very, very restrictive, designed only for packaging, stock cast iron exhaust manifold that doesn't flow very well, that was not making very much power, and the 2.2 is a pretty good example of that. It means only 146 horsepower. So if you're comparing a header to that, it should be pretty easy to get gains over that. Although in reading through all of the YouTube stuff and the internet stuff, I read across a number of comments where they were saying, oh yeah, tube headers, like headers don't make any difference. Like, I don't think that as an absolute statement is, it's an awful lot to me. It's an awful lot like saying that cams don't make any difference on a 2.2 either. Let's see. I'm trying to scroll back to find out where I was. Oh, here we go. Yeah, and if you're in Sacramento, they're probably gonna get flooding there. What's the best Allison motor for 7,000 RPM build? All of those motors will run easily to 7,000 RPM. The 6-liter will make the most power. The Carry series, those guys have tests where logs lose a bit, but those guys are at the extreme. I haven't seen anybody do an actual direct back-to-back test that would satisfy me to Like I've seen guys, oh, I had a turbo on this, I had a header on this one, and I had run a different one on this one, and this one's making a lot more power at less boost. Like it's a completely different motor and a completely different test and a completely different application. You can't compare that stuff. I want to see a regiment into account all of the variables. On the GLH log manifold, I'm doing the factory one because I want to buy a small Journal 327. So you want to buy a small Journal 327 to fund another, building my first muscle car, 68 Rambler American with a Chevy 327 powered by. Very cool. Try to put a head on the flow. Try putting a head on the flow bench and test exhaust flow with a tube and with a cast iron manifold on it and see if the flow is the same. I don't know what that will tell us. That's not going to tell us what the exhaust manifold does for power, especially on a turbo application. You ever stroke small bore big blocks? 396, 390, 383s. Oh, you're talking about a big block Chevy, a 383 Dodge. I haven't ever done one. This is the first 396 that I've ever put together. Anybody run dual 4-inch exhaust on an LS motor, or 3 inches is the best size? There's no reason to run dual 4-inch. That's way more exhaust than you need. Even dual 3 inches, unless you have a lot of motor that you're breathing through, you won't need that. If you have a twin turbo setup and you're running dual 4-inch exhaust, then that's a good idea. So Peter, you're specific to the Flowmaster after the turbo, or can it be any kind of turbo muffler? It might be cool to do a good a turbo exhaust test. What ECU would you recommend for a 96 Explorer 302 V8 that will get a turbo? I'm looking at shooting for 400 horsepower at the wheels when I'm done. There are some Megasquirt stuff that I think plug into the factory harness. So I don't know what you're putting this in. The Holley stuff works great. We'd run fast stuff before that. All of that stuff works. Are you running an aftermarket balancer on the GLH? No, I think we put a new factory one on. Menard took over the Indy Buick V6 program. I wonder where all that stuff went. Qualified first and second, 95. They made good power. The stock block stuff, their problem, at least when they're racing them, was they could put them on pole, but it was harder for them to finish the race. Does anyone know what motor's in the S10 Blazer that runs at the Cletus events? That thing is ridiculous. What size wastegates for twin GT45s on a 327 small block? And what brand? So why, Austin, why are you putting twin GT45s? Do you want 1,500 horsepower? Or are you looking for less than that? And I would put two 45s on it for the wastegates. I think the wind has taken my audio away. Oval pipe works good with magic valve events. Shh. Can't be telling people that. Round flows better than oval. Is there any kind of check or test? I'm scrolling. Let's see. I hear the chambers on Flowmasters make you lose a lot of horsepower on turbos. It'll be interesting to test because I've heard similar things, and I've heard things like that with turbo mufflers too. The turbo being in air quotes. So I would like to test that. I don't think your friends like you very much. They don't. I get that a lot. My exhaust tubing starts round, but ends up becoming oval from being smashed into the cars. Yeah, that happens. Is there any kind of check or test for measuring rocker arm trunnion play on stock rockers? You can do a wiggle test. You can hold the center and wiggle it around to see. I don't know how much is too much. Why are you breaking up tonight? I don't know. Guys have made 500 wheel horsepower with a ported stock one. Guys will literally set up duals over the topic on if headers work or not. I guarantee you that a header will make more power than that stock exhaust manifold. I could tell you that just by looking at it. And I think what would be cool is to do, you need to set up one where you have 2 turbos because 2 is better, right? No sound here in Northern California. Huge storm. Yeah, there is bad weather here. Some guys end up hammering on some of the long tubes. They didn't really change power when Engine Masters did that video. They hammered on them pretty good. I mean, they closed it what looks like about halfway through. I mean, halfway closed, and it didn't really affect power. That's what I'm talking about. When I try to tell people that, oh, the headers flow more, I'm like, no, that's actually not what's happening. It might be that they flow less. I believe GM used the 3.8 Buick stuff for NASCAR Busch Series. The 3.8 would have been too small. I think that the limit was 5 liters in those, if I remember right, or maybe 4.5. So did they do big versions of those? The connection is laggy. Are there any existing GM 4-cylinder engines capable of making equal horsepower and torque numbers like the blueprint concept? Didn't they say 340 horsepower or whatever? There's nothing that's that big. There's no 4 cylinders that are that big that I know of. I just seen a bell housing adapter plate for Honda K series to Chevy with LS flywheel and clutch. Nice. Yeah, Tom, we talked about Ken Block. That's sad. Yeah, they took hammers to the headers, and it was, I mean, they didn't hammer on them just a little bit either. Recal said if you guys lower your resolution to 360p, it will help the laggy and blocky vid feel. We have really high winds right now and lots of rain, although I don't know how that would hurt the resolution. As you know, any muffler after a turbo will lose power. So that's a pretty bold statement. Any muffler will lose power? I'd like to test that. Would you ever stroke small bores, big blocks? Would it be worth it? If you make the engine bigger, however you do it, whether it's bore or stroke, you can make more power. Bigger motors make more power. So the fact that it had a small bore because it was a 396, if you put a 4-inch stroke in or 250 stroke, as long as I don't know about how much clearance there is on the 396 block, like how much clearancing you have to do for the bigger stroke. My guess is it will fit because you can put the stuff in the 427 block, but obviously I would verify that. But yeah, it will be bigger and it will make more power. So you're on my side during the 50-man battle royale. Well, we'll just show them dyno results. It'll be a lot easier to do that. Moto IQ compared long tubes versus short tubes. Conclusion: long tube for NA builds, especially if running cams, taking advantage of exhaust scavenging. Short tubes or logs for boost. I get that, and that's normally what's done for scavenging. But people want to know if long tube headers actually aid power on boosted applications too. And I'm just curious about that because it's just another thing to argue about or discuss to discuss, like rod ratio and so. And it's another thing I want to test: rod ratio, and then obviously putting. So I have plans for this year putting the water meth injection pre-turbo because that solves all the problems, and we want to test all that stuff. We want to test it all. I have a 3-inch turbo exhaust running down under. Problem is now clearance, or rather the lack thereof. Street car and VA can't run fender through the hood. Make exhaust into 2 pipes and run it back. You can do that. First gen Acura RDX use variable flow exhaust manifolds to help with turbo lag. Cool. Blueprint set on the specs with the right turbo. Well, that's why they were giving you such a big. That's why they're giving you such a big torque number. If that motor has enough camshaft in it and it's 10-to-1 compression and it has an LS3 head on it and you have the right intake manifold. I didn't notice what kind of intake manifold they had on, but if you have a good enough intake manifold, there's no reason that it can't make essentially half of what an LS V8 does. Certainly half of what a 6-liter or a 6.2 makes. Actually, it's half of a 7-liter, so, or 7.2 liter. So it certainly could make lots of power. Engine Masters tested a bunch of mufflers on 600 horsepower engine, and they did not kill power with high flow mufflers. Yeah, I ran lots of muffler testing on my Engine Masters motor, not Engine Masters the TV show, but Engine Masters the competition, because because these were street motors, even though none of them were street motors, because they were all, light rigging package, just silly combinations that were only designed to do what we were asking them to do. But we had to run mufflers on them. So I went through a number of mufflers, and the MagnaFlow stuff seemed to work very well for what we were doing. I would get a Honda and turbo it. Those are Honda stuff is good. Did NASCAR really make power with aero turbine mufflers? I tell a story about the guy that brought the mufflers in that had little propellers on them and wanted to test them at West Tech. And we're like, he goes, yeah, they extract the exhaust. We're like, oh, dude, that's cool. Extract the exhaust. That would be awesome. What spins the propeller? He goes, well, the exhaust does. And we're like, just a second, it'll come to you. So you're spinning the exhaust. You're spinning the little propeller with the exhaust. And then that same exhaust is extracting the exhaust out that's spinning the propeller. He eventually got it. And then the little propeller blades. The mufflers themselves were actually pretty good. I can't remember whose they were. But the mufflers themselves didn't hurt power, and they sounded pretty good and stuff. I think that when they were testing, I think they just blew the little propellers like against the wall. So that didn't work out very well. I had clearance 427 block for a 4-inch crank, same as the 396. Okay, yeah. So, and I didn't know if a 4250. I'd have to ask Brule if they've ever had any, like a 396 that had a 4250 stroke crank in it. Yes, any muffler. Dave and Steve didn't test do endless muffler tests on the turbo application. And then you'd have to decide, well, what size muffler is it? Is it a 3-inch muffler? Is it a 3.5? Is it a 4-inch? Is it a straight through design? Is it what is it that qualifies as a muffler? I need a 496 powered Chevelle. That's good. If you're going to put together a big block like a 454 from the wrecking yard and you're going to buy a crank and stuff for it, you should make it into a 496. Why is a Hellcat supercharger under the intake manifold? Primarily for packaging. Isn't it true headers aren't as good regarding reliability compared to thicker factory logs? That's another reason. The factory, like cast iron, is really good, and it lasts a long time and it doesn't really wear out. If you look at it, if you go get like we have at the car farm, if you look at a factory cast iron exhaust manifold for a turbo 2.2 or 2.5, it's still there. It might have rust on the studs and stuff, but the manifold's still there and will presumably last forever. Those will be sitting there when everything else has been destroyed all around it. So those last a really long time. Tubular exhaust will not last that long. You will definitely wear out. I mean, we've worn out headers. We've literally worn out headers from running them on the dyno. We had to replace a set of 5-liter Ford headers that were even coated. But I mean, and when I say we wore them out after 20 years or 25 years of running them on the dyno. And so, but it wears out the tubing and wears out the welds, all kinds of stuff. Does the turbo affect scavenging of headers with the restriction of the turbo being so close to the valve on an NA header length is 26 to 30 inch? Yeah, the ideal primary length is variable depending on what RPM range you want the scavenging effect to happen. So it can be 36 inches. It can be shorter than that. But that was my question. I don't know. When we put a turbo, like on the Honda one, I ran the Apex or Apexy or Apex I long tube header that one of the 15 headers that I tested when I was running this Del Sol back here. When we were running that in US Touring Car, I ran through 15 sets of headers, or not sets, it's 15 headers, different header configurations. And then even more if you count all the, what I call the B pipe, the section of tubing after the long tube header. We ran the one that worked the best. And it was actually designed, they made it for a Type R, for a 1.8 Type R, but we ran it on a B16. That header made the most power. And again, we were looking for onesies and twosies when I was doing this because we were limited in the modifications that we could make. But we ran that header and then a 90-degree bend, probably 3-inch or 2 3/4 or something, into the flange for the turbo. And the turbo is fairly small. It's only 57 millimeter. I mean, it was enough to make a lot of power, but it was a 57 millimeter turbo. So does the restriction that's inherent in the turbo cause a problem? Does the scavenging wave never get to come back? I mean, there's lots of questions about that. And are we talking about 2 horsepower versus 20 or 30 or 50 or several hundred that we're getting with a turbo, so we shouldn't even be concerned about it? There's a lot of stuff there. Happy New Year. Wheelbase media's in the house. I dropped a 4250 crank with 6.8-inch rods in my 400 block. Oh, is that on a Dodge? I do like the 400s. What are the impacts of mounting a turbo more remotely? I have remote turbo stuff up on the channel. There are vehicles that have all-wheel options that leave more space beneath the body rather than the hood. Yeah, you can put them back by the rear bumper. You can put by the front bumper. You can put them in the bed of the truck. All of that works, and it works surprisingly well. Let's see here. Ever test wastegate exit to atmosphere versus plumb back into the exhaust, the power difference? No, I haven't. And his question is that if you plumb the exhaust back in, if you plumb the wastegate exhaust back into the exhaust, you're having to flow more exhaust. Would you then get more? Would you then get more back pressure, or would it hurt power because you're trying to flow more exhaust? Probably not. But it's a lot quieter if you do that. There could be a point where you get to, if you're near the flow rate of the exhaust where it will start creating a power loss without having the wastegate, and then you add the wastegate to it, that could happen. I don't know where that is relative to the motor that you're testing, the turbo that you're testing, the boost level that you're testing it at, the size of the exhaust that you're running, that you're having to run. The more restricted the exhaust, the more likely that could become problematic. If you run the big open exhaust that we run, like on the engine dyno, it's never going to be a problem. But on a street car, it's a good idea, just for no other reason than it's very, very loud, to have it the other way. I don't see why running turbo on long tubes wouldn't work. No, it works just fine. I've run them like that. I just don't know what the Ken Block passed away, if somebody was asking about. How much does shorty headers provide performance under what RPM range in an LS3 Camaro? It doesn't. You're not going to gain power with shorty headers on a LS motor. I have lots of videos up on that. If a blower took like 50 horsepower to spin with an electric water pump, AC, delete, and manual rack, kind of make up for that loss compared to keeping all accessories and running more efficient power outer. First of all, if your blower only required 50 horsepower to spin, you wouldn't be flowing very much air. Most of them are a good bit more than that. And also, the rest of your accessories don't take anywhere near what the blower takes to spin. They're never going to be 50 horsepower for all the accessories. Nothing sounds better than a 180-degree header into a merge box. I have not tested 180-degree headers on the dyno, and I also have not tested like 8-into-1 headers either. I probably will build a Sidewinder style header for the, well, I'm thinking about doing that. The problem is there might be a problem with the way that we would have to route it to go over the back of the dyno. So I might just do a straight out header for it. And then we can, I don't know, extrapolate from that. Yeah, Sean, if you warp the cast iron exhaust, that's that's hard. It's hard on stuff. As the exhaust gases cool, they lose amount of energy they are transferring to the turbo. So the closer the turbos are to the exhaust manifold, the more efficient they are. I don't know what your definition of efficient is there, but if we run both of those setups, if we run the remote turbo and the standard turbo and we run them at the same boost, how much of a difference do you think there is in power? There might be a difference in response rate, but the difference in absolute power is very, very minimal. The reason that every cam is, Alicia, I don't know, it seems like you've written that about 8 times. If I see it again, you are out. I need a 557 big block Ford and a Fox chassis, okay? What's a good price for long tube headers? I don't know for specific applications. I don't really price them for chassis specific things. I heard it was 20-30 for a fan and water pump delete, but that would be a nice, easy test. I think probably been done. Yeah, it's been done by me. You can take a look. That video's up. I did accessory tests. How many people on the chat have a single digit quarter mile car, like a 9 are you talking about, or better? Buddy of mine built a front-facing 80-into-1 header and a 78-75 turbo, feeding a 6-liter. How much horsepower would I lose going from LS swap cast manifolds? I got a G body and I'm tired of burning wires. There are good exhaust manifolds out there that will work, that won't burn plug wires and stuff, and you're not gonna lose power. I still keep dreaming of remotely mounted turbos with an oily system separated from the engine. That's why Ford EcoBoost 4-cylinder has the exhaust manifold built into the header, better response time. Yeah, they're actually more concerned with cat light off for on the OEM level. But David, how can I contact you about an LS383 build? You can ask right here. Just ask the question if you have a question. Let's take a look at do long tube headers make more power than log turbo manifolds? 77% are saying yes. If a blower uses 150 horsepower and breaks said motor at 1,000 horsepower, can it be said that the motor could make 1150 on nitrous? Mechanically speaking, no, it doesn't. Those two things don't equate in any way, shape, or form. Honda did twin turbo straight to the head merge port through on a V6. Yeah, they've done that in I think lots of people have done that. I think Volkswagen did that on their 4-cylinders too. They merged the head, basically all 4 of the ports into a single exit, which like what Honda did, and then just you can mount the turbo to that. Obviously, if you can mount the turbo to the head, the aluminum thing, I was a little concerned with that. But we've run aluminum exhaust to keep weight down for race applications, but it's usually fairly far back that we transitioned from steel to aluminum. We're getting most of the weight loss because most of the length of the exhaust is aluminum. And we don't have to worry about it melting. I don't think. I don't know about it withstanding the temperatures that are associated with a turbo deal, especially if it was on for a long period of time. Let's see. Richard, please explain to me and my friend Dave how a cam would raise my compression. A cam will not raise your static compression. A camshaft can raise your dynamic compression because of magic valve events, especially if you advance the cam. You can and when you're talking about compression, are you talking about your static compression? Are you talking about cranking compression? It will definitely affect cranking compression. The smaller the cam, usually the higher the cranking compression, or if your cam is advanced, the higher the cranking compression. Scrolling through your videos, I usually do. Have you done anything with a 350 TBI? I have not. I tried it and I was unsuccessful with the TBI motor that we tried to run. We eventually took off the TBI and just put a carburetor on it. I think I tried a 305. We may have also tried a 350, but way back when we were trying this, we didn't get the TBI to work very well with a fuel injection. But it is something we should try. Do thumper cams make more power? They mostly do them for sound, and I don't know what you mean by more power. That a thumper cam will make more power than a stock cam, certainly, and more power than a smaller cam than the thumper cam is. But there's nothing special about them. They were done for sound. So blower drag doesn't weigh on the motor. It does, just spinning the rotors, if that's what you're talking about. And some blowers have less drag than others. And some blowers have less parasitic loss associated with driving the blowers at different boost levels and RPM levels and flow rate levels. And all that stuff needs to be tested to compare them. What are some good resources to learn about the motors? There's lots of stuff available online. I mean, L67, Supercharged 3800. I have videos up on that. It's currently stripped, getting ready to be built. Mostly concerned about the bottom end. The bottom ends on those are pretty strong. We just put rain gap on them. I really appreciate all the information you share. I just love when you throw in the boo-wah. It's all part of it, man. You gotta make the car noises. I do that when I'm just driving with my sons. Have you done the advanced versus retard cam timing? I have. There's a video up where I tried thinking that I was going to be hero advancing the LS9 cam because it's so weak down low. I thought advancing it would improve the low speed torque output, but as it turns out, that did not happen. But I did another test on a small block Chevy, but it doesn't change it dramatically. On the factory VVT stuff, they designed the cam so that it works with the thing that they're trying to do. And they put a lot of effort into it, not just selecting a cam and then putting an adjustable sprocket on it or an adjustable cam gear on it and then advancing and retarding it. I did lots of cam testing, advancing and retarding with the various Honda things for like this thing, for the Del Sol, for the books that I wrote on Honda stuff. We did spent lots of time advancing and retarding those cams. And I'm going to do it on the 2.2 Dodge as well. I just need to get a gear for it. I'd like to see a test of a TBI 350 with a TPI intake. So why wouldn't that just be a TPI motor? Why wouldn't you just do a 350, a tune port like an L98? Richard, what is a good low cost 1,000 horsepower turbo for a 408? An S475 or an S480? Like that Summit Racing T6 S475 is probably a pretty good choice for that. Thumper. That's right. Will you test FTI cams? What is an FTI cam? What oil pump, coupler, and 12-volt electric motor will be a good combination for a remote turbo with its own separate oiling system? So you want to have a reservoir and a cooler and all the things that you need to have a separate setup? I don't know about pumps for that. I mean, there are oil pumps that we've used to circulate the oil from a remote setup, like back into the valve cover or somewhere. But I would be very worried about having a system that's an electric pump like that that's remote and having its own system, because that's another thing to fail. Will a tight LSA lower dynamic compression? No, it actually should increase it. Rochester 6-pack 350 versus 360 TBI Magnum. I don't really understand what those are. The song is just the one that I put on the intro to all the videos. It's just one that was available on the software that I use. I stopped working on my 6-liter. You can't do that. 4L60 4x4 Astrovan. Very cool. Dude, points for that, man. Astrovan, all-wheel drive. Because TBI heads have swirl ports in the intake. So you're concerned about the swirl port? Screen reader would not read the question. I don't know what I just said yes to. Richard, do I owe you? No, it's all good, man. I don't remember what it was either. Let's see. How can I achieve 10.5 to 1 compression with a 4-inch stroke and a 3905 3cc flat top piston with an MS3 cam? The cam is not going to change your static compression at all. So the cam is not part of that equation. 10.5 to 1 is just going to be a static compression reading, and that's going to be a function of your displacement. So what you need to do, David, is you need to go to a place called Wallace Racing Calculators and go to Wallace Racing Compression Calculator, put in all your information, and it'll tell you where you are now versus where you want to be. So you put in the combustion chamber size, the head gasket thickness, the bore size of the head gasket, the bore and stroke of the motor. You need to put in the CCs of the piston if you have valve release. Once you put that information in there, you push the button and it will tell you what your static compression is. I'm trying to scroll back. FTI flow tech induction. What is? I don't know what that is, so I'm not hip on all of the cool lingo here. I don't know who flow tech induction is. Do they make? I mean, are they like a race place or something? Oh, Aaron, that sounds like the guy that I want to work with. The guy that owns FTI talks crap on Richard all the time on Facebook forums. I've gotten into multiple arguments with him. Yeah, it sounds like my kind of guy. Be a good idea for me to go work with him. Sorry, this is a newbie question. There are no newbie questions. When picking twins for a V8, do I treat it like 2 4-cylinders? No, the way that you pick turbos is based on the power output that you're trying to get to. So if you want 1,000 horsepower, you pick 2 500 horsepower turbos. It's really very simple. And then once you pick the turbos for your desired output, then you do the other things on your motor to, have it make the power. If you have 1,000 horsepower with a turbo or turbos, the other things that you're due to the motor are with a lot of different combinations, you're still going to get 1,000 horsepower because you have the things that can make 1,000 horsepower. So you can run any of 1,000 different camshafts and endless different cylinder heads and endless different intake manifolds and stuff. TBI heads make big low speed torque, but are done by 4,500. Same as the TPI intake manifold. I think they're a better match for the intake than the L90 heads they use. I don't see how cylinder heads are going to do that. Having tested lots and lots of cylinder heads of different sizes and stuff, different port volumes, the cylinder head has very little effect on low speed power. At least it has in my testing. So I'd be very surprised to see a swirl port head make more low speed power than a L98 if the compression and all of that stuff was the same. I would be very surprised if that happened, but it'd be worth a test. I know the Smog 460s have retarded cam from the factory. And if you put them back to straight up, that does help. They've done that on a few different applications, not just Ford, but other manufacturers have too, and that's a pretty common cure. I have an 87 LX 5-liter 5-speed, less than 90,000 original miles, and still stock. Should I build it? You just drive around and enjoy it. I have an 88, but I don't know how many miles mine has on it. I'd have to. It's been a long time since I saw it. Just made it here. Just wanted to make sure I didn't say yes to something I regret later. No, man, you're all good. The Crossfire was very good. Yep. What turbo would you recommend to turn a GT40 Cobra Explorer motor into 400 wheel horsepower? Does it have a cam in it? That's probably, I'd put a GT40 on it. I mean a GT45. That turbo worked really well on the 5-liter that I ran it on. What is near highest compression possible on E85 on the street on LS? On E85, you can run whatever static compression you could possibly build into an LS. You would be limited in any sort of standard displacement LS. You'd be limited in how much compression you could put in it anyway. So there's no real limit on that for an NA motor. Richard, what is your go-to motor, step up and dream vehicle? I don't have a go-to motor. I like all of them. My ultimate car would be a McLaren F1. Let's see. Dynamic compression includes intake ram effect, wavefront, ring gap boost, cam timing, and a number of other things to try to explain the actual pressure. Wavefront, ring gap, boost. '92 versus 102 millimeter 2019 video. I haven't seen it. Any sort of throttle body size would be a function of what you're asking it, how much power you're asking it to support. So if you're asking a 92 or 102 millimeter throttle body to work on some kind of intake manifold that you have on a 5.3, even a modified one, either one of them are going to be big enough. If you're asking it to do it on a 7-liter or an 8-liter that's making 800 or 900 horsepower NA, the bigger throttle body is going to work better. And then any you know, and the range in between there, you're going to have a sliding amount of how much better the bigger throttle body is than the smaller throttle body. You may get to a point where the 102 is not nearly big enough where you could get even more power by having two 102s or two 92s or something. The gain that you get from a throttle body is a direct function of what you're asking it to flow. Richard likes the Ford supercar. I had a Ford GT, which I liked, but that's not anywhere near the ultimate one. A McLaren F1 would definitely be it. Daniel, you have a 243, 251. I'm hoping you're not trying to put that into something that has a stock piston to valve clearance, because it's probably not going to fit. And then the RPM range that you'd be running it at would be a function of what intake manifold you're running, what cylinder heads you're running, all of that stuff. The cam is not going to be the only thing that determines what kind of RPM range you're running. What happened to the 24-hour marathon? We're still talking about that. Ben, 28 to 30 is fine on ring gap. So, Tom, you want a Magic Valve Events t-shirt? All-wheel drive Toyota Celica. Those are cool. Or a 323 GTX. I like those. Truck Norris Cam NSR. If is your question on, I have video tests up. I mean, I test videos with where we tested that versus the standard and the standard high lift version, and they both work. They both make good power. Would an external pump like a Cadillac oil pump make more sense than a small block Chevy for remote? Most people use electric ones. What cam would you recommend for a GT45 Turbo Cobra? The fact that it's a turbo wouldn't make any difference. The camshaft that you choose would be a function of other things, like what do you want the cam to do before it goes into boost? How do you want it to drive around? How do you want it to idle? Do you want it to cruise? Do you want to, you know, how much RPM do you want to run? If you have that sort of long runner intake manifold on there, you don't need a whole bunch of camshaft. And if you're only trying to get 400 at the tire, that's going to be really easy with any kind of camshaft. So you can put a fairly mild camshaft in there and still make good power. So we're going to close out our poll at 77% saying yes, they would. They think that headers make power on a turbo application. Blind guy, your question on adding a secondary injector, that's done all the time. It's one of the tricks that we used to do way back in the day. That's also possible. The problem is on long runner intake manifolds, it's hard to get distribution right on a TBI motor. That although I don't know what you're putting this into, but you need to look at fuel distribution. So if you're putting it, you know, after the turbo before a manifold, like an LS manifold, the fuel distribution is going to be terrible adding fuel before the intake manifold, just like it is with running water meth and that stuff. Let's see. And it's time to go. The time really flies. Time flies. It does fly when you're having fun. And these chats are always good. So I will be back in the morning. Not in the morning. I will be back after I have stuff to do in the morning. So I won't be able to do the live, the morning motivation live chat at 7 anymore. It's going to have to be after that. It's probably going to be more like 10 or 11 or something like that, my time, Pacific Standard Time. It will be later, but I will be there. So you guys be there. Thank you all for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow. Bam, 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 bam.